Welcome back, folks. Promise you, we're gonna have a pretty special edition for the European RMR. Cheers, everyone, for watching the Asian and the American videos, by the way. And I mean, where do I start from here? I mean, I don't really need to introduce my guest for the European RMRs is Thorin. I mean, I can just say the name. I think is pretty self-explanatory, unless you've been living under a rock, but. Yeah, he's going to be here to talk about Group A. We're going to have a different video for Group B of the European RMR. First things first, we started here in a really friendly manner, but how have you been doing?
What do you mean, but? Like, you say that as though now you're going to be like, but actually, I've always thought you were shit. So what do you think of that, eh? Well, now, bitch. That like took a weird turn at the end there. Okay, fair enough.
You know what?
Just keep it on a friendly
non-native English. Don't blame the non-native English.
All good. Just the turn of phrase seemed a bit sinister, like a bit ominous at the end. It's
okay,
I'm all right. Here's the thing. In general, I've done some things. I did an event recently. I still bit content. Obviously, I've never done as an important a contribution to Counter-Strike history as, I don't know, get like 4 North Americans and enter them into like the European RMR or anything crazy like that. But I'm trying my best, Ted. I'm trying to have an impact on the scene in my own way,
Yeah. You know what? In your defense, you probably did. I mean, you, Richard, and Maui had a great one in Finland. The desk was the desk was great. I loved it. Obviously, Richard still got to do the RMRs in the major, which is great news, of course.
Oh yeah, and Maui.
Yeah, and Maui. Yeah, it was about
It's
time.
just the North Orange Club. That's all. Yeah. Apparently it's only me that's not allowed to do them anymore. It's all good.
Yeah, I mean, it's how things are, sadly, but we move. But yeah, other than that, you've been up to a lot of content as always, I guess. So have you actually already spoken to someone about the RMRs? Have you done any content?
No, I haven't done any content at all. I have to say, actually, it's one of those areas where I'm just a little bit too old-fashioned in that sense.
Okay.
Like, I'm only getting adapted to streaming now, Ted. I've only done it for like 3 months or something.
Yeah.
So I'm actually not as ahead of like I only just started doing like historical tier lists recently. I've realized it actually is a pretty good like feature to use because it's very easy to like. One of the mistakes I always made was I would just do a real top 10 list, whereas I think the tier list is better because it's like a really good visual guide. The person could sort of see how you're thinking as you go.
Sure.
So, no, I haven't actually done anything like this, but I probably should do it in more future. It's probably a good reminder for me, if anything.
Yeah, I mean, the streams are hilarious, by the way. I'm not gonna lie. I don't really watch Twitch streams. Like, if you look at the end of the year, my top 5 Twitch streams are just tournaments that I've casted, and I've just had the stream open. But yeah, I find something hilarious about when you say, okay, is there any questions in chat? Nothing happens for 10 seconds, and like, I might just shut off the stream and fuck you. But yeah, okay. So
by the way, on a more serious note, I'll give you actually a real point no one's thought about, which is it's because actually one epiphany I had was, I don't know if you know this, maybe you do because you've done shows with me. The jokes I make on Twitter are the same jokes I would make on a show, but because they don't see your face and you don't have the same delivery, they just don't land. Like, people just take it seriously. Like, they actually think you're never joking. Whereas, like, as you see when I do those streams, like, it's way more funny when I like roast someone on camera than if I just did it on Twitter. On Twitter, people think you're being mean. Whereas, like, on my stream, you can sort of see the character I get into. I just basically roast everyone. You're right. It's just including my own subscribers. It's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's from like a person that met you, like, that's filmed just 2 videos with you this year. I can safely tell that you sound a lot more rude than you actually are when I just look at the tweets. Like, the first time I was coming in for Snake and Batter, I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, I'm just going to say something dumb. He's going to tell me, fuck off, you idiot.
You thought I was going to roast you or something, right?
Yeah. You know what? I was up for it. I was like, you know what? I'm excited for it. Yeah, if it happens, it happens. It's how it goes. But yeah, I suggest we get into it. So we're here to talk about the European RMRs. We're going to talk about Group A. And I think this is a really exciting one, to be fair, because obviously there's, because of Asia and mainly Brazil from the last major, there is fewer spots for the European teams. Now there's 7 in each groups, right? There's still 16 teams, only 7 of them get the spot. So that means we get a -1. And with all the big organizations, all the investments, all the star players, all the expectations, this is inevitably going to cause in someone being, quote unquote, a disappointment, right? So there is a lot to unveil here. Now, as we start looking at the teams, there is a pretty clear predicament for me, obviously, who the favorites in the group are. So we're not going to spend too much time talking about Navi, Vitality, MOUZ, FaZe Clan. I have a pretty funny twist when we get into the tier list later on for you to make a choice between those 4. But initially, taking a look at all the teams, is there someone or a couple teams that strike you as those guys are not going to do anything?
This is just in A or B. Are we just doing it at the moment?
Yeah.
If we're doing it at the moment, The obvious one for me is Rebels Gaming, the team which is the all-Polish team with like Innocent and they're coached by Schmero, so old school players people might know from literally like 10 years ago trying to make it in the majors. The problem with this team is if you ever watch like tier 2, I think they're just kind of a whatever team. I know you've seen them in like the odd big tournament, but they always go out pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
And then also, I'll just put this out there. I mean, a lot of people I've noticed who cast and analysing the tier 2 scene have hinted at this recently, but I'm a bit of an elitist anyway, but I extra don't care about tier 2. I won't say them specifically because I have no clue, but I'll just say that tier 2 space in general, I find really hard to put a lot of stock in the results. Like, put it this way, if some of them aren't outright match fixed, there's a lot of like crazy variance in those games, let's put it that way. So I'll just say from the times I saw them, I didn't think that team was particularly good, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah, you know what's the best part about it? First of all, I agree with the point that you're making because I feel like there's too much tournaments and too many games that all of those teams are playing to put a lot of emphasis on the results, right, and judge by them. Second of all, that's why I have you here, because you said you're following mainly the tier 1 scene. I'm a guy that spent the majority of my youth rather than being outside and socializing watching tier 2 Counter-Strike. So we're getting the best of both worlds. So there is a couple main storylines that I'd want us to go through here with that group. And the first one I think is a really obvious one to start it off with. Obviously, s1mple's return. And he's played a couple events now. He played the Thunderpick World Championship. Actually got to cast the debut. That was a fun experience. And then they played the ESL Challenger Catalan, right? And both times the team in itself of Falcons didn't really work out. Now, a lot of it might come down to obviously the fact that s1mple hasn't played for 1 year. He still did well, in my opinion. But then when there's that energy that the team is just going to fall apart in the end of the season, it's probably difficult to focus. But give me your initial thoughts on Falcons. Do you think that there is some potential for this team to actually do some damage at the RMR? And what do you think about that entire can s1mple be s1mple again question?
I mean, on the Falcons part, I found it actually really bizarre how they played because they actually, as a team, looked worse, even though he was actually playing quite well himself. Like every other map, he was actually pretty good, and he was even sometimes the best player in the server. And also, I would say on average, he already looks like it was worth the gamble over s1mple, even though I did think s1mple was good. So the weird thing is, I still think the roster move makes sense for like both parties in the short term, because obviously in his case, he's got that weird loan thing where like it could turn into a real thing, or maybe this is like, by the way, here's the other reason the loan part was smart for s1mple. It's also a way to show your skills off. If it doesn't work out here, maybe another team does want to gamble. By the way, maybe a G2 wants s1mple. Who knows, right? There's all sorts of crazy roster moves could happen after this major. So I think the move was good, but I will say Falcons, the team looks really bad right now, unfortunately. Like, basically, obviously s1mple wasn't really like 2018 s1mple, but some of those games, he actually did have like games where he was the best player in the server and they actually lost the map fairly convincingly. So that's a bit alarming, because what I hoped personally was that him joining would sort of like not make them really good, but semi-fix the team. I thought if you just put like because when I watched their squad, yeah, they had other issues, but one of their biggest problems was they didn't have the stars. Like, everyone knows they didn't get Nico. Boros had to be kicked, unfortunately, for like out of server activities, etc. So for me, if you added in a player, in this case, it's a great gamble, because obviously he doesn't have to be amazing now because they're Falcons and it's just like a trial anyway. But I thought it had promising signs. But the thing is, like, that's why this RMR is perfect, because if they're actually as crap as they looked in that tournament, that online and the LAN part, then they won't get through this. But I actually think if you look at the group that they're in, like, they're on the border. They have a chance.
They're playing equal in the opening game.
Feels like they've got a shot, right? It's maybe a bit more of an outside shot than people would hope, but I don't think it's totally implausible they can make it.
No, absolutely not. I mean, you never know who they would get in the second round, but first round, you're getting a best of one against Eclod, and there's a couple familiar names on Eclod, obviously Kriaz being the most notable, but it's still a team that Falcons should be beating, and I completely agree with you. As I told you, I got to cast some of the s1mple games and some of the Falcons games, and that was the precarious thing, because as you said, on the team level, it just looked really discombobulated, but he himself actually didn't look bad, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm one of those people that actually think that if s1mple decides, and if he has the motivation and the drive for the game, he can still be one of the best players in the world.
Yes.
A top 3 player for sure.
I'm convinced, mate.
Yeah,
there's only a few players. I don't do it with a lot of them. Like, here's the thing. Even if I'm the biggest fan of certain players, if they're a normal human, you can't know whether they'll ever come back. But the ones that sort of got halted for their own reasons, like s1mple,
Nico,
Device when he went out for a year, Nico when he had like that little down to, those players I'll always give like a couple of extra chances, because they've also done it, if you notice. Like, they really have like sort of resurrected from the dead. Either like in the case of Nico, he didn't even stop playing. He just became twice as good after a player break. Like, these people, I think they almost do deserve like an extra sort of leeway that we don't give to normal players in the scene, you know.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's kind of like, imagine if while Ronaldo when it was in his prime on Real Madrid, if he had one off season and then everyone else is just going to say, well, you know what, Ronaldo can't be the same player. Well, he probably can if he decides to, if he still has the motivation and everything. But a really interesting angle, and that's going to be the final point that we make about Team Falcons. In your opinion, because obviously there's going to be changes after the end of the season, and the players are probably already aware of who's going out, who's staying, and stuff like that. Well, they should be probably, but do you think that this is actually a good thing rather than a bad thing? Because for a lot of those guys, there's not going to be a lot of pressure because they already know if they're going out. And it could actually be quite freeing for them to play a pretty chill game, for the atmosphere on the team to be good, and for them to actually advertise themselves for future endeavors after the season is over.
I'm not sure because the problem is I feel like certain people in the team, like I'll give you an example. I know a lot of fans, because he's not the biggest name in the team, want like Madden cut. The two main people they want cut, you notice, are the smallest names. They want Snappy and they want Madden cut, basically. Right? I actually feel like Snappy, it's fairly obvious to me, he would still get into a good team. I think a lot of people respect like his game and his skill set. And I actually think even Madden, like I'll tell you an obvious one right now. If they kick out Madden from Falcons, you think G2 100 and Pekka and those guys don't just instantly It feels like it's just an instant move. So I feel like those guys are fine. But I'm going to go the other way to you on this one. On normal tournaments, I would agree. It's basically secretly. It's why, if you notice, a lot of analysts aren't actually saying, sorry, Snacks, we were wrong. You're a great IGL. It's because, as far as we can tell, that time, the whole time's been a dead team. They brought him in almost sort of like, right, you're just going to be the last season of the Nico version of G2 Biscuit. He's definitely going, as you've seen by all the interviews. I mean, the CEO couldn't be more blatant, could he? Like, they almost like packing his bags for him, like, see ya, bye. So since we know he's going, I think that has allowed that team to play without the same pressure, because they sort of know there's going to be moves no matter what. The problem is, though, normally I do think that can be a buff, but I'm actually quite worried for some of the players in Falcons now that it can be the opposite, because I actually think if you're the names that did win, Zonic, Dupree, Magus, these are all people in theory you might on paper want to stay. I think it is enormous for those guys if they fail to make a major, no matter the context. Like, I don't think their psyche can handle it, bro. I even think, I'll give you a prediction right now. If they don't make the major, I wouldn't even be surprised if on camera you see s1mple get really angry, mate. I know to the rest of us, it's like, you want to just come back. Don't say, no, you don't. Like, this guy really is one of those nutters where he sort of believes he should be. He thinks
about the mindset, I think.
Yeah, he thinks he comes from Mount Olympus, mate, and he was dipped into a pool. He's immortal, something, which, look, in a way is why we love him. But I think, unfortunately, these guys, they're not normal players like that. They're so storied. I think actually this could get to them if they lose. That's why the one upside for me is you're shading in like, it's okay, Nico's on the way. That's a pretty good cavalry to have coming over the hill, like Gandalf the White or something. So I think it's more like you just hope you make it into this major whether you bomb or not. If you do that, it's actually okay, I think, for Falcons.
Yeah.
But I do think if you don't make it, like, the bigger issue for me is this. Nico's coming anyway, but the question is it just Nico, or are like three people coming? And I think if you do really badly, it could be like half the team getting changed, you know? So I agree with you. It is a good advert, but it could be an advert for your current job as well as for someone on the team.
Yeah, and it could be that sense that Gandalf is not coming in to help Helm's Deep, and he's coming in to actually help take it. That's a funny way of looking at it. So moving forward, I think we're gonna get back to the Falcons in the tier list, obviously, but there's a couple, as I told you, main storylines. The next one that I find really precarious, and this is one that I'm gonna scroll up and actually open the lineup for this, because I want to emphasize. I want to emphasize on how many good players there are on this team. So we're looking at Cloud9 right now. You have Axel, who used to be one of the best rifles in the world for quite a large span of time, right? You're looking at Boomage, who won the Stockholm Major with Navi. He was probably one of the main reasons that they were able to play as good as they did as a team. In my eyes, a really decent in-game leader, and individually a really potent one. You have Heavy God, who's, I'd say, arguably one of the biggest talents in the Counter-Strike scene in the last couple of years. You have Icy, who's, I wouldn't say he's the top talent, but he's still decent. Mechanically, especially, he's still good. And then you have Inters, who's bringing in a lot of experience. And then, obviously, you have a decent coach as Groove that's achieved a lot. So my question towards you is, why is Cloud9 so shit?
I do think this, I agree with you. I was actually wondering, because I know a lot of people actually kind of countertake to me. When this lineup was announced, I actually thought this is actually a fairly promising lineup.
Same.
Like, I even sort of like the roles, you know, like from a CSGO built team building perspective, they fit all the roles out. And you've got that nice mix of, like, you've got the older players who, like you say, are established and have done things. You've got the newer players who are the prospects. You look, there shouldn't even really be role conflicts in the team. So I agree with you. The weirdest thing about this team, I actually think they're one of the most mysterious teams in the world. Because one, they're not a team that, if you notice, we almost get any like information information about. Like, we never really know what their team's thinking, or what is Groove thinking, or why did they pick these players. You never get a reason. And then the other thing is, I actually do think also, if you watch them, like individually, each player sort of plays how you'd expect, but collectively they're not very good, unfortunately. Like the team component of when you put the pieces together, and that whole concept of like you're more than the sum of their parts, they're not. Sadly, this is just the sum of their parts. So they have some decent players. I have to say, I'm actually really underwhelmed with it, because I really did think like they might actually be like a dark horse team. Like maybe this could be like, I don't know, the 10th best team in the world or something. Maybe, you know, maybe it all comes together. But sadly, they've just kind of been a bit meh. Even though I agree with you. Like I don't really look at like a specific player like you're feeling. I even think if you go look at the stats, aren't basically the players you wanted to frag sort of fragging like you expected. It's kind of, that's why I say it's kind of a weird team, isn't it? Because it looks like it should work.
Yeah, you know what's the worst part about it as well? Because I had a look at, because at a certain point, I just felt like C9 was my nemesis. I just hated everything about how the team was playing, because I love all the players and I think the mixture is really good. I looked at some of the demos, and I honestly don't feel like the game plans are that bad. I don't feel like the calls are bad. I don't feel like they're having bad reactions or whatever. It just doesn't work for whatever reason. It's just incredibly discombobulating. So I just find it difficult to still put that team in the category of, let's say, other pretty chaotic teams right now that are going through changes, like, let's say, a Fnatic or a Gamer Legion. I would actually give them more credit going into the RMR than I would give to Cloud9 right now with the recent form, although it's really difficult to overlook a team full of those individuals. But moving forward, there is another team on the list that is particularly interesting, and that's before we get into the top dogs. And I have a really special question for you after we discuss that. But the next topic, and I know you're gonna have an opinion on this, but Fnatic is one that is incredibly awkward. So again, on paper, it feels like you have a decent mix of players. You remove Afro, you throw in nawwk, you have an in-game leader such as Body that is known for giving a lot of space to his rivals, known for making everyone feel comfortable in the server. You have blamef and MATYS, which is incredibly unfair firepower to all the teams that are playing against them. And for whatever reason, this team as well is not in top-notch form. Now, what I want to say is they haven't played any officials in a lot of time.
Since they added nawwk or whatever, yeah, they haven't played many, it's true.
Yeah, they played the LAN in Belgrade, right? That didn't go perfectly, but they still made it into the playoffs. But are we maybe expecting Fnatic on the back of spending a little bit more time practicing to go into the RMR and surprise people? Because again, I guess it's a similar conversation to the one that we have on C9, even though there isn't as many major winners here. Obviously, there's Crims, but when you're looking at Fnatic, you still feel like this should be a team that could be at least a dark horse, right?
Yeah, I mean, I actually on my channel did an interview, I think it was like 2 days ago or something, with the guy called Ross R, who used to work for Endpoint, where they found all those players, Nerds, Flames, all those people. And basically, the reason he got hired, he's sort of like, not like a general manager, but he's some sort of like, the term actually, by the way, he's from Ireland, so he uses like English sports terms. He describes it as a bit like, you know, like a technical director in football, where it's more like you hire the coaches, but you also have a say in like who joins and stuff, but you're also looking at the overall program and, you know, development. Basically, you're like a big brain in the org, right? This guy, I found he was actually very interesting, mate. Like, he was one of the people where he's doing things like, it's not just the eye test, he's also doing things like using special tools that analyze, like, you know, mechanical ability in the game to see who the standout players are. And the reason I bring this up is, I was told the reason he actually got signed to Fnatic was when they had Mezzy. He was one of the people that brought Mezzy through, like, Endpoint, for example, after the Cloud9 time. So, as far as I know, this guy actually seems like he has quite an interesting approach to building teams, and he is trying to build the team, like, piece by piece. He's not doing that thing where you go and get a different team and just add one player. If you notice, he's like gradually bringing one piece in and trying to do like a Cassad-esque upgrade on the roster. And actually, I'm with you, mate. I think on paper they've done it. The key thing is just, when is the team itself going to like become cohesive and actually get some results? Because I actually think if you look at this squad, it's actually a pretty well put together roster. Because if you think about it, right, as you say, if people don't know, the main player that's going to trick you if you haven't watched this team is the MATYS guy.
Sure.
He's actually really good. Like, he's like clearly like a talent. Like, I'm actually amazed he's on this team. I would have thought with all the people trying to scout. That's why I think this Ross R might be like up to mustard. It sounds like he knows how to get ahead of like the other big teams, because this guy looks like he absolutely could be on like a MOUZ or something like that if he wanted to be. Skills seem there's aggressive rifler. People don't know. blamef is obviously still blamef, but if you've ever watched him, I thought Nero did the best thing you could possibly do for blamef's career when he did that article that showed how people perform versus ecos and versus full buys. Because what it showed was every hater of blamef was only ever half right. You know, when they went, all he does is kill eco. No, he kills the ecos and the full buys. The thing you're missing is, yes, he's mega baity on the eco ones. But 1, that's actually underrated in CS, go onwards anyway. Like, this isn't 1.6 where there's 5 people with Glocks and you sit back while the guy does like an ace in a movie. Like, in CSGO, people have like a Tech 9 and flashes and they kill you and they get your gun, etc. So actually being able to mop up ecos is good. And then secondly, anyone with an eye already knew blamef is fucking really skilled with rifle against rifle in the bet. I agree with you, mate. He's actually overqualified to be on this team. Like, realistically, they should be working with like a younger player. Like, he's actually a player who, if he was on a proper team, probably would be HLTV top 20 again. He was every other year, guys. So I think already, like, you've got some good firepower then, which means this is why I think this is like a shrewdly put together team, mate. Because I haven't even mentioned the 2 Swedes who are both famous players. So nawwk, if people don't know, was never like a dominant AWPer like some simple Zewu. He was always the more boring, like old school hold and angle AWPer. By the way, that works awesome when you got these players in this team. And then Crims, if I'm mentioning Crims as your 4th player, you already know there's a half-decent lineup, right? Because, yeah, he's not at the peak of his powers, but he's got insane veteran experience and also just seems at this point in time. I'll just throw this out there for people who don't know. You know, a while back, there was a whole thing where when they had zweih in this team with Alex back in the day, there was that whole thing where Brolan left and he was like, I want to speak Swedish now. He even admitted later he didn't. He just didn't want to speak English to zweih, right? That made people, I think, back then, because it was also a whole thing with zweih and Crims, think like, oh, maybe Crims doesn't want to play at national rosters. I get the vibe Crims is actually okay to play with anyone, mate. This guy just has, like, I think, a really strong, like, baseline mentality to playing CS. It seems like you can put anyone around him and he just plays the same way anyway. So I actually think when you look at the squad, the only one I'm not sure about is Body, because obviously the Body I remember was the old player who was an up-and-comer in the French. Now he's the IGL, like you say, he's taking a very different role. I do think there's a lot of pressure on him, because to me, that's one of the roles where, you know, when I was saying earlier, what if Falcons was to cut Snappy? Bro, imagine you pop a Snappy into a line like this. Wouldn't you immediately be cooking? Like, you'd have a bunch of pieces. So I'm with you. I actually think this is a pretty solid, like, dark horse to, like, nick a spot for the major, maybe.
Yeah, I think they have good balance as well. As you pointed out, the fact that Crims can fit into everything, Body's now doing kind of like labor work in the server, and then nawwk is
like legit, there's no bad players. As far as I can tell, there's no bad players in this team. It's a quite well put together squad, Yeah,
and you have 2 defensive guys, 2 really aggressive guys.
The balance is good too.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that being said, now before we get into that, I have one more team that I want to talk about specifically, which I think is a really fun storyline considering we're going into an RMR. Now, there is, as I pointed out, I wanted to leave the top dogs out of the conversation, at least at the start. But there is one of those 4 teams that notoriously always struggles when it comes down to RMRs. And
I already know where you're going there.
Yeah.
Does their name have a big F?
Yeah, there is a big F. There is a big Z, and that's because they honestly just fall asleep sometimes when it comes down to the RMRs.
It's true though, yeah.
What do we make out of FaZe Clan? Because I think it's really interesting. It's a really interesting conversation to be had. Because from my perspective, at least, it kind of feels like they just don't want to play together. I mean, you're looking at some of the interviews. You're looking at what Carrigan is saying, what Robson is saying. They're all saying we can on a good day beat everyone. But then something goes wrong, and then everyone gets frustrated on the team, and then everything goes sideways, right? And we all remember those RMRs where they used to lose to the Bad News Eagles and some teams that they should be beating every day of the week, and they were barely able to make it through in a 3-2 fashion. Now, the fact that there is 7 spots now and not 8 means that they will have to win a couple more games if they want to qualify. So is there a world where we can put FaZe in that position of the top team that is most likely to actually miss out on making it to the major out of this group?
I actually think that's fair, because I noticed, I forget if it was on Snake and Bant or something, but someone made the point I thought was a very shrewd one. Maybe it's even a hot take point made. Maybe I think it might even have been a Kassad take, now I'm remembering it. Which was, even though it sounded mad, I sort of agreed with it, which is FaZe is like the team that has the highest variance on both ends for this major cycle. There's a world where they really could just get it together, fuck around, trip over, get into the playoffs, win the first quarterfinal, and make like semis, and then suddenly you'd be like, what the f is FaZe back? But there's also a world where they could just bomb this RMR immediately and go like 1-3 and just be out, and then everyone's like, cut off the team. And I even think the thing you alluded to there is actually a very shrewd point, mate, which is, have you noticed how this is the only team, publicly and privately, there's never a single hint that anyone actually wants someone specific cut? It's the only team I've ever seen this with ever. And I think that's actually a downside, believe it or not, because it'll sound counterintuitive, but the reason I'd say it's a downside is the good thing I've found in a lot of teams, and this is actually why I think super teams struggle, is when you have a normal team, like think about how I did the Fnatic Fnatic one there. Like, your obvious stars is like MATYS and blamef.
Yeah.
Then you've got like nawwk sort of in the middle because he's the AWP. You have to have some resources. And then Crimson's obviously getting pushed to the outskirts, and then Buddy's the agile. Everyone, that's streamlined. Everyone in that team, the day they walk in the office, knows what his role is, what my role is, how this team's going to work. I think when you have teams like FaZe, part of the problem is there is no clear star in this team. So that means, by the way, sometimes everyone's allowed to be carried sometimes. That means sometimes people can play badly. That means sometimes you can even think, as you can't in certain teams, like you can't in other squads, if I play badly, these two guys will carry the game. I even think when you look at their map pool, hasn't the same thing happened to their map pool? Is FaZe actually world-class on any single map? They're not really, but they're also not bad on most maps. You know what I mean? So I think the biggest problem for me, the biggest concern is psychologically, because one, I get the feeling this is almost certainly a team. I mean, I've heard the stories before where they were maybe looking at moves themselves. I think there's almost certainly a team that, unless they win this major, is changing their lineup after the major. So you already know someone's probably going.
Sure.
And then I'll also throw it out there as well that I think when you look at this team, part of the problem is nobody's bad on this team. And because nobody is bad, it's really hard to know who you should even cut. Like, what would even the fix be?
You probably cut more than one person.
I think this is a mystery to everyone, including FaZe. I think you nailed it at the beginning, mate. I don't blame them. I don't know the answer either. I think it's a really hard one with this. It's hard to know who to cut. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, mate.
Yeah, this is a really difficult one because I feel like it's been like that for such a long time. And as you said, I completely agree with that. I mean, if Kassad was the one making the point, fair enough. I completely agree with it. You can see a world where FaZe just bomb out and don't even make the major. You can see a world where they have a deep run into the playoffs as well. It's just such a that's the definition. Although I hate that term, by the way, when people say a team is momentum based. But FaZe is the definition of a momentum based team. Just the pure definition. There isn't a single other team that could just ride the hype train as much as them. But yeah, with that being said, before we get
by the way, I also feel like even every single tournament, even all these ones where they just come out, 5th to 8th, I feel like every tournament, they always give you one match that makes you believe again. Just when you're ready, like, right, you know what, if they do ready this time, I'm totally out. I agree. Like, stop being homer about FaZe. And then they'll have that one game where they either do win or they come close to beating the top team, and you're like, they're back. It's, by the way, it's nearly always the one that Robs just turns up and plays CS in again. But like, that's why it's so sad. They're the hardest team to quit, I have to say, because they're my favorite team, but they're so hard to quit, mate.
Yeah. Well, sadly, my favorite team has been dead for a lot of years. I used to be a North fan, by the way, and that didn't go well for me.
Okay.
Yeah. So
RIP MSL.
Yeah. I was a big fan of MSL, by the way. So I'm not gonna lie. I loved it. Yeah. That's why I'm still supporting TSM, by the way. Valid, big up my boy. Okay. So this is the final one before we get into the tier list, and then we're gonna wrap it up with that. But another one that I want to ask you, and this is a bit more of an open question, and I know you said that you're not following the tier 2 scene so much, but there's a couple familiar names in those lesser teams. Well, I say lesser teams. You still have BetBoom that have, I mean, anyone bar McNoise and Zorti have played tier 1 Counter-Strike, and Zorti's been around for 20,000 years. Sangal have Jumpy, who's an incredibly...
Do you want my joke? I'll give you a free joke. I haven't used it on any of the shows, so we're testing it here. This is like an open mic night.
Yeah.
Right? You know how people used to say MOUZ is poor man's FaZe, because it always looked like same kind of construction, and obviously the joke is the players eventually go from
Are you
going to
say BetBoom is poor man's Spirit?
No, they're poor man's VP. Because like you just said, on paper, all the players should be good, right? This mix should be good, mate. But on an appropriate level, in the same way MOUZ is always below FaZe on the performance. Like, you know how you watch VP and the same thing, you look at the roster, you go, this should be great. What the fuck? That's garbage in the server. You look at the roster, and I still, when I look at this roster now, I'm like, how is this team irrelevant? Like, that should actually be like a dark horse on paper, if people don't know. Like, the Zorti guy is just good. Siren and Kyron were like up-and-coming players the last couple of years. Nefati wasn't terrible, even if I had criticism of Cloud9. Like, I'm with you, mate. On paper, that you shouldn't even be a solid team, but just like VP, they always underwhelm somehow, right?
Yeah, and we're looking at all those teams. We're looking at Sangal, we're looking at BetBoom, Nemiga, Gamer Legion, Fnatic, if you will, Sinners, C-Clot, Rebels, Unity. I just want to say Oskar is still class, by the way. He dropped over 2 rating at the close qualifier of the RMR.
By the way, I have a question for you. Here's a quick question as you're going down this list here. As an outsider, I'm a bit of a layman for the tier 2 teams. I actually thought the biggest difference for me between the 2 RMRs, because you know what people normally do is this, Ted. They look at an RMR, their brain doesn't look at all the teams in each RMR. They just look at how many big teams there are, and then whichever one has more big teams, they go, that's unfair. But I actually think the reason why these 2 RMRs are sort of fair is because for me, the Group A one has less of the big hitters and more of like, I actually think the danger goes deeper into the group. I think this one has a lot of like upset potential. But Group B for me is more like big hitters, and then the ones below are less likely. So I actually think it's sort of evened out in a way, if you know what I mean.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And you know what? It's funny because your question is leading to my question question to you, so I'm just gonna pull out the Mirror Force card. I was gonna ask you, which one of those two of those teams do you see the most likely? Do you find they have the biggest chance to actually pull off an upset? And let's say if we have if let's say on paper people would be expecting Navi, Vitality, MOUZ, FaZe, Saw, maybe, I don't know, C9, BetBoom or whatever to qualify, which one of the tier 2 teams would you see make a deep run into it, qualify for the major? Which one is the darkest of horses, to put it that way?
Right, here's the problem. When I look at these squads here, like, I either think based on, like, players I actually know. Like, by the way, some of the few players, this is why I actually think Game Legion's done a very good job recruiting as well. The players they recruited as their, like, re-up are the players I knew as the good players from tier 2 when I watched some of the games just to do betting, basically. So I think Game Legion probably has, like, underrated value for people who just haven't seen them play much. The Fnatic lineup, like we said, actually on paper already looks solid.
Sure.
If I had to pick one other one, if you want, like, a really dark horse, my real dark horse would be Sinners. And the reason why, you're going to like this, obviously, since you asked that question about s1mple earlier, I absolutely will put oskar in that category. oskar is a player who is literally a generational talent, if people don't know. I watched this guy from 1.6 when I can tell you nobody knew him. He was a nobody fucking Czech Republic guy who basically I was just watching frag movies of, and I didn't even know those, you know, Neff and all the, no one even knew if those players are even fucking good. So back then we used to have to speculate, like, is he actually good, or is it like, you know, big fish in a small pond? Well, that's what we found in CSGO. This guy's insanely good at CS. Like, I think for real, he's mechanical, he's a genius at CS. He's really, really talented. And so if people don't know, he's one of those players, a la s1mple, where he didn't, like, get pushed out the scene because he sucks and he's not good. He chose not to be in top teams. He chose to be in tier 2. He chose to stay at home as far as I know, just play with, you know, play like on his computer and then go and spend his life with his family. So I think this is another guy where, yes, I understand he's really old and we don't expect him to be in, like, his prime from 7 years ago, but he's overqualified to be on this team. So I actually think I'm not even being a ridiculous, like, you know, nostalgic guy in this sense. I just think of a player like that. Remember, in this format, you only need to get a couple of wins. A player like that can win you a BO1, absolutely. Yeah. He can steal you a game where he just gets an AWP, gets rolling, it's the right map, and a Mirage or something, and just take over the game. Like, I think, even though it's going to be a dark horse, because look, no one knows these Czech Republic players outside of their region, obviously. Like, they're not a massive famous team we see at the IEMs, etc. But if you want to go for a real dark horse, I don't think it's implausible. Because like I said, that one player, that's a player you have to carve out, like, a special circumstance for. Like, he shouldn't be at this level. If he wanted to be, I'm sure he could still be playing in the bigger teams himself.
Sure. Yeah, I back that. And also, by the way, this is something that you might not know unless you've watched the Sinners recently, but they've recently picked up a duo, Mike and Marisco, from the domestic scene. That Marisco guy is fucking insane. So they have the firepower, and I rate Shock from the team as well pretty highly. So I'm on with you on this one. I think Sinners is an exciting one. I'd probably go for a different angle. I'd probably go Nemiga or Sangal, because I think those are just the two best teams right now in the tier 2
Do you not worry about, obviously, if people don't know, Nemiga, the guy Flamus on Game Legion, was like the star of the Nemiga biscuit. Is it not a problem that they lost him? Does that not worry you?
I don't think so, no, because they got zweih. I don't know if you know him. He was essentially a 17-year-old guy that comes in with 3 best of 3s on HLTV in his career, and they were for a team called the Vaseline Worms before he joined the team. This zweih kid just played his debut LAN in the RES in Belgrade. He's an incredibly smart and clutch player, and I think, honestly, Nemiga is one of the most underrated teams in the way that they're.
Oh, they are, for sure.
They come up with a lot of things that tier 1 guys steal from them. Literally, their tempo change. Xanter is a bloody monster, and he's filled up a lot of the roles that were left by Flamus. Obviously, I just think this team in general, Xanter, zweih, Lear is an exception. OIGO has a lot of potential. But with that being said, we are going to move into the tier list. And just to read past it real quick. Now, this is where I've decided to make it a little bit more challenging. Obviously, you have CU and Shanghai. Those are the teams that you think 100% will go through. But you're limited to choosing 2 here. So you got to choose your top 2 of the group for that first category. And then...
By the way, just for me, what are the categories? I can't quite read
I'm reading them out. You have CU and Shanghai, which is 2 teams. And then there's no limits for the rest. Second one is disappointing if they don't make it. So they should make it on paper. Then you have the third one, which is potential dark horses, which is the middle ground. Then you have if the stars align, which is pretty much, pretty self-explanatory. They need a miracle to happen. And then the final one is excited to visit China.
Okay, right.
Okay, we can start it off. I think we can work our way up from the bottom. So excited to visit China, we're going to start it off with.
So we'll just start with the worst team. So I'm going to put Rebels in there. They're 1.
Okay. We have anyone else here, or that's it?
Am I doing it all? Am I doing it all?
Yeah. It's your tier list. Okay. I'm just guiding you through it. I'm not gonna say anything.
Let me think. Who else for this one? I'll put Unity because I just don't know them. I'll put them in there as well. I'm actually amazed this team's in this point. I'll maybe put the Dynamo Eklot team too.
Sure.
And I think I'll leave that. That's my bottom row. The others at least have a chance, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm going. Am I just moving from the bottom up, or we do it that way?
You can do it. You can do it the way that you're comfortable with. I would advise we started with the bottom, then we go at the top, knock out the two best teams, and then it's a lot easier to fill in the middle ground.
So I can only pick 2 for the guaranteed to make it.
Yeah. So I know usually the choice would be Vitality, FaZe, MOUZ, Na'Vi. Yeah, of course. You got to pick 2 of those though.
See, this is the tricky thing. The Na'Vi one's easy. I could pick Na'Vi. The problem is it's actually the second one. Because if you think about these other 3, like in theory, I guess I'll have to, at the moment, I'll go with Vitality as the other one. But I have to say that one's actually more touch and go. Because I also feel like, I don't know about you, but I've actually found this like MOUZ slump they had like, say a month and a half ago. I found that really disturbing, bro. Because like most players just suddenly look shit. They were losing all the maps. They were losing to anyone they played. Like that just shook me a bit. Because I always thought this MOUZ team would have like an insane flaw. Like this should be a team like Na'Vi, in my opinion, that like almost can't lose before a semi-final. So that just shook me a little bit. So even though, by the way, I do think Vitality is all over the place, depending on what day it is. They do have zweih, and I'll give zweih one thing 100%. He is fucking unbelievable in group stages, mate. Like he's probably gonna do like a 2.0 rating or something. So I'll go ahead and say that I'll take Vitality as my other one.
Okay, yeah, MOUZ is a really fun one, by the way, that we didn't get to touch upon, and I was hoping we would discuss it here. I think with MOUZ is really precarious because for let's say the first 5-6 months of the year, even when Na'Vi won the major, I would swear my life on the fact that MOUZ was playing the best Counter-Strike, the cleanest Counter-Strike, had the best protocols, and we're just the best team in the world, strategically wise. I know they weren't winning a lot of events, but you know it doesn't always come down to who's playing the best on paper. And now I don't really know what's happened in the last month and a half, but as you said, it kind of feels like a lot of the guys just don't have the same confidence that they had in themselves at the start of the year. If you're looking at, let's say, Yimhat, he hasn't really been having those monstrosity of games. I know he's just an anchor player. It's not his work to be carrying, but you can just tell that he doesn't have the same level of confidence, I think, from my perspective. So this is a fun one. I still think they should be making it 99%. Don't get me wrong. But I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think it's a pretty similar conversation to the one that you could be having with FaZe, although I see MOUZ as much more stable. But they are still a team that could potentially have a bit of a lackluster run at the major.
You could also argue as well that they have a factor as well. Like maybe they are a dead lineup also. Like the other reason why it's hard to know about the motivation levels is when you look at people like the obvious names like Yimfat and Exertion, you can imagine like literally there's already a guy in a FaZe and a Vitality jersey who's like, shall I write the check now, sir? You know what I mean? Like they just wait for this match to end in a way. So like that's the one thing. They're an example of a team where I actually worry that they're getting like the dead team like nerf, if you know what I mean. Because I almost feel like people mentally are already ready to go to the big squad where you do win all the tournaments, if you know what I mean.
By the way, I'll say it right now. If, and I hope G2 really are considering an IGL change, if Shui is an option, you just get that guy 7 days of the week, 30 days of the month, 365 days of the year. You just get Shui on the team, and it's problem fixed. But yeah, I assume we're not going to have the FaZe Clan discussion. They aren't disappointing if they don't make it, even though we said what we said. So is there someone else who you're going to put in that category, or we're going down?
I think that's fine for now, because I actually said, like, on this one, I feel like it's less top-heavy and it's more like the middle's the interesting part. So actually, we're going to the most interesting part of it, right?
Okay. You know what? I'm going to intervene a little bit with a bit of a bit of a whole one. I will actually put Solid. And
even though they lost one of their best players.
Even though they lost one of their best players. Because I looked at some of the games recently. I honestly don't feel like they're playing worse Counter-Strike. I don't know what happened internally. Because from my perspective, it has to be an internal issue for Barry and Aristos to leave when the team was playing that well. But now they have Golden as a coach, which I think is a great buff. It was long overdue for him to move into coaching, I think. But I think as a coach, he would be excellent. And I really believe that this is a team that is just the purest definition of a team. They just don't depend on one guy, even if it's a star guy, even if it's someone that's playing great. I don't think it messes up with the system. And by the way, they have been playing good Counter-Strike as well with Agile, and I really believe that this lineup still, in terms of pure quality and fundamental Counter-Strike, is well ahead of a lot of the others.
It's all right. There's a video here, so let the record show. Even though I am on screen right now with a tier list that shows Saw in that category, and that's not. No.
That's me. He
chose that one.
Yeah, we're gonna clarify it. If I post it on Twitter, I'm just gonna put it in brackets. I'm gonna be like, the Soul pick was mine.
It's good bait, but yeah. If anything, you should post it initially without that. You should just post a screenshot. Like, Thorin picking Saw to make
I'm just gonna wait for them not to make the major and then yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, okay. Reddit will love it. Okay, so moving to potential dark horses. Who are we putting here?
By the way, as a random aside as well, I will also say a factor that Saw always has going for them is everyone knows their biggest strength is on nuke.
Yep.
And if you notice in the modern map pool, almost no fucking team in the world bans nuke, by the way, as a permaban.
Because no one wants to play fucking Vertigo.
No. Yeah. Exactly. So in the modern day, I actually also think you can pretty much always get that in play. So and also, let's just throw this in as well, mate. I feel like in CS2, not very many teams are good on nuke either. A lot of people don't like it. It's actually a map that maybe because the game's not as CT sided, it's just not as popular even with the big teams. So I actually feel that is real upset potential in an RMR. Like people have to play on it eventually. Like where are we going now? We're going to the next category.
Yeah, we're going potential dark horses. So those are the 50-50 guys. Really dangerous teams, but you see a world where they don't make it. And remember, we have 7 spots. So those are only 5. So 2 of those that we put in, we believe that at least 2 teams from here could make it, essentially.
So yeah, I'm feeling like Fnatic's one of them.
Sure.
I'm going to put them.
Okay.
Because like we've described earlier, I think the roles make sense. I also think, unlike some of the other squads, their squad, because they added nawwk like in September or whatever, like they also, I don't judge them so much. I still feel like their best could be yet to come. Whereas the difference is, I agree, like people like Cloud9, they've had quite a lot of chances already. But I actually feel like the other name, here's the thing. My heart wants me to put Cloud9 here, but I've just never seen them ever do anything, bro. So bizarrely, I'm actually going to go the opposite route. I'm going to say Game Allegiance, the other one I'm going to put there.
Okay, so
the reason why I'm going to say Game Allegiance is because I actually also did an interview with Ash, the coach of this team recently. Yeah. And one of the things that's very interesting is Game Allegiance is one of those teams where, because if you remember, they had the most extreme version of what happened at that Blast Paris Major. Remember when those teams came along, there was the 3 teams, wasn't there? There was Into the Breach, the little UK team. Yeah. There was Apex, who we already knew the players from anyway. They just hadn't had a top placing. And then there was Game Allegiance, who were like up and comers, right? And if you remember, the way it went was Apex pretty much got to just keep most of their lineup, except GL, basically, who actually wasn't even their best player. That was fine. They got to continue on a little bit.
Sure.
Into the Breach was already mad overqualified to make it, so they basically immediately lost a bunch of people and had no one. I mean, but the worst one was Game Allegiance, right? Because remember, they were in the final, and they basically immediately lost the 2 best pieces. They immediately lost Emma, who looked mega, and then Shui, the IGL. Yeah. So I've always thought the problem they had as a squad was they had to figure out what is the identity of Game Allegiance, the team? Like, how do we re-up? And if you notice, what they did in the time between that major and now was they initially tried the route of, like, because we're now known, what we do is you do that thing where you try and take the players when they're on the down and you bring them back up. So they took Snacks. They still had Acorn in the lineup, and they were they're bringing people in. They were just gambling on like reclaimed projects, as it were. Whereas what basically from talking to Ash, what he's done now instead is he's also gone the route of trying to like scout talent. And what he's done instead is he's done what I think is an excellent modern day way to build a team, which is he's made his like star players are the young fraggers. They're the ones with like skills that we've already actually, if you actually watch Tier 2 CS, these people are already good. They're all already good. Like these are all players individually. You could have gone to a Tier 2 coach and go, what do you think of this kid? He'd go, actually, he's an up-and-comer. He'll probably be on like MOUZ or OG or some team, Fnatic in like 6 months or something. Agreed. So I think he's actually done a fairly shrewd job. And I actually like that approach, Ted, because it's a bit more like what people do in games like Dota, where what you do is you get the stars, cause mechanical ability can be someone who's just fresh out the gate. You get the young players as the stars, and you put your more veteran guys as the like role players, the IGLs, the people who set the game up and do the thinking. So I actually feel like that looks to me like what they've tried to do with Game Legion. I feel like it's all going to be about, do they hit? Like, can these guys on LAN actually do it? But I feel like it's a lineup where if a fan's very casual and you look at this, you might go, I vaguely remember those names. It could potentially be a lot better than I actually think the name value is. I feel like this is like a sleeper team for me.
I completely agree. I think my only concern, because I can go on a 1-hour rambo for all the players on Gamer Legion, because again, all of them are coming out of the Tier 2 scene, and all of them I followed their entire careers, right? I really highly rate that decision making from Ash, and I think the lineup is great. The only concern I have is that it's a really young lineup. And for me, it would be a normal thing if they don't do well here at the RMR, but I have no doubts that in, let's say, 6 months, this team is going to be sick. And also, I like the Dota reference. I mean, my Dota knowledge isn't that big, but I remember what they did with that Bulgarian guy, BZM, if you know him. When they picked him up in OG, he was like 16, and you just put him with Notel and Sep on a team, and everything works out. So, yeah, I think the approach is great. I would put Gamer Legion here. Is there someone else you'd add to the potential dark horses, or everyone else just goes in if the stars align?
Let me think. Because like I said earlier, I've actually found BetBoom really underwhelming, mate. Like there's so many times in tournaments I've thought like, hey, they should have like a chance to upset, and they never seem to ever. So for me, they're not up there. The other one, the main one, would be if I just choose to believe in Cloud9, I feel like. The problem is, do I do that or do I do, because the problem with Sinners is I mainly do it on an Oskar angle. I don't know. Do I do? I'm gonna say screw it. I'm gonna say I'll put Cloud9 as the other team there. We'll do it. We'll just say that they can. All they have to do is nick the 2-2 game or whatever. They can get in on that front. I think this is. But as I said earlier, I think this is actually quite a hard one to do though, because I feel like loads of teams could be in this third and fourth category. Here.
What I will say, if I was doing it personally, I would really put Sangal and Nemiga over Fnatic and Cloud9.
I mean, on form, that makes a lot of sense. Sure.
Yeah. But you are making a good point that for those teams, there's a lot of uncertainties. Experience is missing, so a lot could happen.
No, that's big. I mean, remember, the issue is if this, put it this way, Ted, if this was an online cop and it's being played today and we ever gone to our head,
we're putting Nemiga in tier 1.
They would probably win the cop. The problem is, I agree with you, you can never know when they go to a LAN and they're, oh my God, this is for the major, you can never know that threshold effect. Because I'm with you, like the Jota guy on Sangal looks pretty legit to me, man. Actually pretty fucking good, isn't he?
By the way, myself and Tea Time, during the Res event in Belgrade, we went on a bit of a ramble. I'm going to say it again. The LNZ Jumpy duel of an in-game leader and coach is fucking goated. The work that those two are doing is great. Really, really is. Like, if you look at the way that Sangal is playing, and I know they might flop it. I know they might choke. But the fact that those guys are just coming up with their own stuff, I just get impressed by teams that come up with their own stuff and they just don't want to copy everything from other teams. But okay, we happy with this one? You're gonna change anything, or
I'm all good. Yeah, it's more if you think that's outrageous.
Okay, yeah, all right. So that's all this. So you have your tier list with Saul being in there from my part, and I'll probably.
By the way, as people can tell, I am not naturally biased towards experience generally.
I mean, it's valid, right? Because you've seen those guys play on the bigger stages, win events and stuff like that. So the other angle is more of a my wet dream as a tier 2 caster to just see those guys, at least one or two of those teams, make it up there and be like, yeah, I've casted those guys for 5 years. But I think we can round it out here. It turned out to be a much longer conversation for Group A than I actually originally anticipated. But it was a great one. Yeah, thank you for joining me on this one. Thanks everyone for watching. Make sure to let us know which teams you think are gonna go through, which picks you agree with, which picks you don't agree with. And of course, there's no need for me to tell you to go and check out Thorin. If you're here, then you probably already know who he is and you're following him. So thank you everyone for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.